there I am. Can you see me now? And so it elevates us from a place of feeling like a victim, from victimhood, into that place of agency. And that's where we want to be, because there's a lot of change that I want to be a part of in this world and in myself. So that's the perspective shift. All right. So when I flew off my bicycle and knocked my arm bones out of my arm, it was the last thing that I wanted to have happen. Like when I was lying there on the pavement, I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this happened. Have you had that experience where it's just like this, nothing could be worse? And that feeling of like, I don't want this. I want something different, needs to be held. It needs a seat at the table. This is the first step. The first step in acceptance is to say, like, I don't want this. This is not what I wanted. And it's totally valid. And this is the difference between spiritual bypassing, toxic positivity, and this concept of loving your fate. That when you open to the situation just as it is, you very well may be beginning the opening with, this is terrible. I don't want this. And it needs space to be held and to be validated. And so this is where like the platitudes are like the most destructive. You know, that well-meaning person in your life is like, oh, it's going to be okay. These situations are always like the catalyst of learning. Like that's true. But at first we need space for the grief and the pain and the trauma, because the trauma is real. The hurt is real. And to choose to accept that is to choose to feel it and to move through it. Right? So it's not avoidance, it's actually the opposite. So I'm lying on the pavement in Burlington, Vermont, beautiful day in August 3 years ago. And I'm like, I can't believe this happened. I do not want this to happen. And then the whole process of my surgery, what was supposed to be a 2.5 hour surgery that ended up being 6.5 hours. I detailed over the last 3 days. So go through those and read those like very long posts that were actually like way more verbose than I thought they were going to be, because like I clearly had more to process than I knew. Right. So acknowledging that you don't want this and yet it got dealt to you anyway is really the first step. That was where I began. And I had those couple days in the hospital to feel my feelings, to move through my process, and to reckon with how hurt I was, which for me was very hurt. This was the biggest injury that I've ever had. And at the same time, I felt so fortunate that I wasn't more injured. I hit the pavement so hard. Had I hit the pavement with that force anywhere else in my body, I would have shattered those bones just the way I shattered my forearm bones. So I could have broken my spine. I could have shattered my pelvis or broken my leg bone. And as serious as my injuries were, there were many other injuries that would have been worse. And this is a real mindfuck when you're injured, and anytime that we go through trauma. And I think this is like the seed of my insecurity this week in sharing these stories, is this simultaneity of recognizing that this could have been worse. Other people go through things that are more difficult, and this is very hard. And to hold those in the same place, it is affirming paradox. There's a willingness to be with disparate things, with things that are in conflict with each other at the same time. It's not easy, and it has to come first before the healing. You have to feel it. That's the Amor Fati. And Amor Fati is pointing to the wisdom of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a psychologist and worked a lot with suicide prevention, and was a survivor of the Holocaust. Huge inspiration to me. And his reminder to us is that there are many things in the world that are beyond our control. And yet always we have the ultimate agency in our response, in our inner experience. And that's how we learn to love our fate. It's a radical acceptance of what comes our way so that we can choose our response. If we're not choosing our response, if we're stuck in reactivity mode, and reactivity mode is, I didn't want this to happen, which is valid. Of course, you didn't want it to happen. I didn't want to fly off my bike. Nobody wants a traumatic thing to happen, and nobody deserves it. And it's terrible. And before we can heal, we have to accept it and hold it and feel it. So affirming that it happened is this first step. So after my surgery, I'll pick up where I left off yesterday. Had to take the train back to Philadelphia. My friend helped me load my bike, and I had this like over the elbow cast that went over the top of my arm, keep my elbow from moving. And it's like a splint, after the surgery. And I was so hurt. I was so swollen, and the swelling itself was incredibly painful that, on the train, luckily the first part of the train ride was maybe like 8 hours, 10 hours from Burlington to Philadelphia. A lot of space on the train. And so I just was trying to keep my arm elevated because the swelling was not as bad whenever it was like above my heart. And it was hard the last like hour or two coming into Philly because the train filled up. Every single seat on the train was sold. And so it was harder to keep my arm up. And so it was so painful. And by the time I got back to Philadelphia, my arm was swollen, like pushing through my little splint. And my wife picked me up at the train station. A friend met her there to ride my bicycle home, and they put me in bed. And in bed, I had these pillows stacked up so that I could keep my arm elevated. And I really lived there for like a month. I lived in my bed with my arm elevated for a month. I was in an ungodly amount of pain, and I was very privileged in that I was able to work from home. So I wasn't able to teach my yoga classes, which meant that my income went down some, but I was able to do the administrative work. Like a lot of the work I do for the studio is actually computer work. I was able to do a lot of that by like voice dictating because I couldn't write nor could I type. So with like the modern technology, I was able to dictate things and use the voice feature to send texts and emails and to get some help from my team. And so that was a huge place of privilege that I had as a small business owner, that I was able to do my work from home. And I was talking about this with a friend who had a really bad leg break, and she also had to like elevate her leg so that the swelling didn't get so bad that it was dangerous. And she wasn't able to work from home. She had to go to the office. She had this like elaborate setup of like elevating her leg by her desk. And like her employer like worked with her to find this way, like, of course, to get her leg elevated. And that's Amor Fati. It is, I have to keep my leg elevated. Given that, what creative solution can I come up with? How can I address this to affirm the reality of the situation? If my limb is not elevated enough, the swelling is going to get so bad that it'll be dangerous. And there's going to be like a range of ways that you can respond to that. There are a lot of choices once you acknowledge the reality, right? And so simply like visualizing a better state isn't it. We have to be able to take like concrete actions towards it. But our attitudinal component and the visualization is so important. It's just not sufficient. And this is like my overarching critique with the yoga world and new age philosophy and feel good positivity, is that you cannot just manifest abundance or less suffering. Like when we step back from a platitude like that, we think of like what's happening now in the world, like in Afghanistan, could you say to like the young girls in Afghanistan, just like manifest the future you want? Of course not, right? Because that dismisses the very real forces that are always impacting all of us. And at the same time, the attitudinal component is indispensable when we want to become an agent in our own life. It is the attitudinal component that gives us that leverage, and it's within the confines of the world that we're in that we'll be able to act. So the ways that I'm able to act, I have a lot more options than that girl in Afghanistan. I have a lot more options than someone who had a broken bone 100 years ago, who might have died of infection from a compound fracture, right? So we're acknowledging the limitations of the world that we're in, and we're choosing to affirm those, to see those, to shine the light on those limitations so that we can engage with them and the reality to move forward. Hey, Kyle, so glad you're here. Hey, Jess. And so for me, when I came home from my accident, I've been through some broken bones like this before. I've been through some life-altering experiences like this. And I do know that these instances generally resolve towards deep insight and growth. And yet it's not there at the beginning. It's the end of the process. And the process will deal the full range of experiences, meaning in the grief and in the feeling of the trauma, the challenge, the accident, there will be hope, there will be hopefulness, there will be hopelessness, there will be despair, there will be fear, and there will be everything in between. And this is, I think, like the way that you can gauge, am I moving towards Amor Fati? Am I moving towards a place of agency within experiences that feel beyond my control? Or am I engaging in spiritual bypassing? The way is, am I feeling a full range of emotions about this? So in yoga, in the immersion that we teach at Maha, we share a teaching about rasas. Rasas, R-A-S-A, is a Sanskrit word for, it means taste or flavor. And they're these primary essences of life. And the teaching essentially promises that throughout your life, you will be dealt this full range of flavors. You are here to taste it all. And this is how you gauge if in your experience, you're receiving and responding or you're avoiding. Am I feeling that full range of emotions and flavors? Or am I only in one corner of that wheel? And the truth is that all of us will have a tendency towards like one or a few like emotions. You know, some of us tend to be a little bit more anxious, and like the anxiety will come, maybe even in a situation that's not super anxiety producing for a friend of ours. And some of us will have that sadness that comes at all times. And some of us will have the irritability, get angry easily, like, right? Like whatever it is, there will be, you'll specialize a little bit. And you want to welcome the full range. And if you're finding that you're only in the hopefulness and you're never in the despair and you're never in the anger and you're never in the sadness, it might be bypassing. If you find that you're very irritable and there's a lot of sadness and you're frozen in the overwhelm of it all, you might not be getting to the agency. You might not really be getting to the acceptance, because the resistance and the like, I wish this hadn't happened, you gotta go there. That's part of it, but it's a place to move through. We can't live there because it moves us towards delusion and denial. And delusion and denial, it's like a short-term fix that has really destructive long-term ramifications, right? So I was thinking of this, like, as I've been getting older. This happened to me right around this accident, actually, not long after this accident, where my like glasses, I was like having a hard time seeing, and I having to move things closer, and people in my life were like, I think you got to go for another eye exam. And I'm like, these are good. Like that denial that like things are changing, that I'm getting older, and that it's time for, these are my trifocals now. These are my trifocals, is denial never ages well. The delusion is not gonna serve us over the long haul. And so getting in right relationship, in radical acceptance with the change in our vision, with a broken bone, with oppression, with abuse, with harms that are happening that are beyond our control, is the way to affect change. And so we don't end up at the end, like after my month in the bed, and then I had to get back to work. We had like an immersion program to start. And so I taught immersion with my arm up on this like bolster, like my arm on the bolster, like above. I'll post a picture of me later, like sitting like that. I sat like that for the next like 2 months, right? I had to get back to work. I had to do the things I had to do to keep my household running, to keep the studio running. And so when you move through Amor Fati and you have the way forward, you don't land with, I wasn't like there at immersion, like, I'm so glad I broke my arm, everyone. Wow. It really gave me a lot of clarity about what's important in life. Like it did, but it's not sufficient. It's not accurate to say that we're like grateful for this traumatic experience. But we choose to love the experiences that have been dealt to us, because in accepting them and in loving our role in them, we can move forward and bring our values with us. If I'm just in conflict mode, there's no agency. But when I'm in right action, and I feel that even in this very contracted, difficult situation, I can move forward in this way, there is gratitude for that movement. There's not gratitude for the harm. I'm not grateful for the harm. I'm not thankful for the systems of oppression that are hurting so many around the world. I'm grateful for our response. I'm grateful for the way we, even in this adversity, hold a high vision and move towards it. That's Amor Fati. We love our process. We're co-creating our future. Things are happening to us and we're engaging with them. And in that way, we're not just manifesting this reality, this nebulous manifestation of something positive, nor are we just letting the world wash over us. We're co-creating. You're co-creating. My creating butts up against your creating. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it goes in the way I want, sometimes it feels like a step back. But I'm in the process, and I love being in the process. That's Amor Fati. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Kiki, for helping me with getting the video on. I am in a constant process of up-leveling my tech knowledge, and it's so good to see you all. If these teachings, the teaching of rasa, how to feel the flavors, are interesting to you, I would love for you to join us in the immersion at Maha this fall. This starts at the end of next month. We're in person, vaccinated students only in the studio, and my calendar link is in the bio. So jump on there, grab a time, we can talk through, and I'd love to hear your questions and see how immersion can help you move towards a life and a fate that you love.